Last time on Ikkin Investigates, I introduced Rene Girard's work on violence in the sacred and explored how the prohibitions and rituals of Yevon in Final Fantasy X reflected his understanding of how archaic religion operated. This time, we will delve further into the equally important realms of mythology, the abscess of fixation, and of memetic desire. By the end of Final Fantasy X, the revelations provided about the nature of sin coalesce into a foundation myth for Spira that aligns almost perfectly with Girard's observation that foundation myths almost always begin with a state of extreme disorder, born from the memetic nature of humanity. To be fair, FF10 never provides a solid, authoritative take on this myth. Its details remain vague and indistinct, at least in the context of the original game. But echoes of Girard resound throughout the relevant revelations. The creation of sin is a doomed society's response to a crisis that threatens the community and its cultural system with total destruction. Girard noted that the memetic character of conflict is suggested by the important mythic role of twins or enemy brothers. With regards to the creation of sin, the warring nations of Bavel and Zanarkand serve as the enemy brothers whose escalation in both the creation of Machina and the use of force threaten to destroy the world. In Foundation myths, Girard discovered, the crisis is usually resolved by violence, which is either collective or gives off echoes of collective action. While Girard himself made an exception for the dual violence stemming from the struggle between two brothers or enemy twins, where one of the two triumphs over the other, the creation of sin actually reflects both themes by presenting two simultaneous but distinct outcomes. On an external level, peace is seemingly restored by the destruction of one of the warring brothers. Sin destroys Zanarkand, and Bavel forms a new order around Sin. On an internal level, however, the presence of collective action can be clearly seen. To Girard, collective action suggests a situation in which unanimous violence is set off against the single victim, the victim finally selected by the entire community, a dynamic which re-establishes the former order or establishes a new one out of the old. While Yu Yevon's creation of sin is given in broad strokes and the parallels to Girard's single victim mechanism are imperfect, some similarities are undeniable. The actions of the people of Zanarkand in becoming faith coalesces around Yu Yevon, an individual who becomes both sin and the divine foundation of Spira's order after his consciousness is sacrificed to preserve Dream Zanarkand. Yu Yevon's true nature may remain ambiguous, though being described as Yu, or ghost, certainly implies that he's no longer alive. But even that ambiguity serves to link him more closely to Girard's single victim. Like that victim, he appears to be simultaneously good and evil, peaceable and violent. His existence is both a life that brings death, and a death that guarantees life. He crafts the souls of the dead into unholy armor, and then uses that armor to preserve an illusion of peace. What is clear, however, is that sin, much like Final Fantasy XV's Arden, is meant to serve as an abscess of fixation, a wound created artificially in order to purge the body of its impurities. As an abscess of fixation, the victim is able to polarize violence, bringing the community together as it transfers its memetic contagion to him, and thereby reabsorbs and pacifies all the conflicts. All conflict in Spira is ultimately caught up in the ever-present threat posed by either sin's presence or its inevitable return. Yevon's scheme brings about unity at the expense of massive loss of life. Sin becomes such a threat that it ensures the transference that demonizes the victim will be sufficiently powerful, that the reconciliation provided by the final Aeon appears to be miraculous, and triggers a second transference superimposed on the first one, the transference of deification. Sin is demonized, and Yevon is deified, but Yevon is sin. And in the end, this is what Final Fantasy X rejects. As in Final Fantasy XV, the abscess of fixation may have previously forestalled the annihilation of humanity, but it offers no permanent solution, and what little protective value it possesses vanishes and is replaced with limitless conflict as soon as the hidden victim is dragged into the light. Humanity must either face its conflicts at their source, or be destroyed. The final connection between Final Fantasy X and Girard's work, then, is the memetic nature of Tidus' conflict with his father Jecht. As Girard describes such rivalry, each rival becomes a model obstacle for the other, which causes the two to increasingly resemble one another, and produces twins. This tendency towards twinning is readily apparent in Tidus' words and actions. He's driven to copy Jecht's most famous blitzball move, the ultimate Jecht shot, and his responses at key moments mirror Jecht's own. In fact, Tidus' tendency to both imitate Jecht's desires and see his own desires in relation to Jecht causes the game to be downright Freudian at times. See, young Tidus being jealous of the attention his mother gave Jecht, and current Tidus dreaming of his father stealing his potential love interest. The ultimate consequence of this rivalry, as Girard predicts, is intense hatred. The model that I worship and before whom I humiliate myself, in the hope of being able to acquire his supposed power, turns back into an insufferable stranger whom I have to eliminate, and my metaphysical desire for his very being can lead me to murder. By granting exactly this sort of intensely personal conflict pride of place in resolving Spira's sin problem, FF10 demonstrates that the seemingly supernatural scourge of memetic contagion is rooted in interpersonal conflict. And while the conclusion of this conflict is not entirely free of patricidal undertones, it exists within the context of Girard's ineluctable dilemma. Human beings must become reconciled without the aid of sacrificial intermediaries, or resign themselves to the imminent extinction of humanity. Tidus and Jecht's act of mutual self-sacrifice, then, is not a means by which the two of them are made sacred like the High Summoner and Guardian, absorbing and dying to expel the full weight of Spira's conflict, then joining Spira's pantheon of divinized victims, only ever perpetuated the mendacious spiral of death, and even that option vanished with Unalesca. Rather, they offer their lives as an expression of their determination to break the cycle of rivalry and crisis, to abandon both their memetic rivalry and the personal desires that stoked it, despite the personal cost. Their circumstances might not have allowed a completely nonviolent outcome, but by choosing love and forgiveness over retaliation, they are able to reframe the inevitable violence of their final confrontation such that it no longer kills the victim, placing it above everything else by making it in some sense immortal, but rather reflects the end of the rivalry itself. And, interestingly enough, there's even a sense that others' imitation of Tidus' desire for reconciliation is key to the ultimate victory over sin. After all, the universal participation of Spira in singing the hymn of the faith is crucial for Jecht to reassert his humanity and render sin docile. Final Fantasy X's exploration of prohibition and ritual in Yevon, Spira's founding myth, the abscess of fixation produced by Yu Yevon, and the memetic rivalry between Tidus and Jecht all serve to both reflect and reveal aspects of Rene Girard's theory of human nature. The game's attitude toward religion may seem simplistic on a surface level, particularly when used as a bludgeon against a religion as different from Yevon as Christianity. When considered in greater depth, however, FF10 presents a compelling take on both the violence inherent to archaic religion and the apocalyptic threat posed by human desire that such violence can no longer hold in check.